On today's show, we'll be joined by weekly co-host Alykhan Bijani to break down some of the big picture takeaways from the Rockets' pair of back-to-back games in Denver against the Nuggets, some of the positives, some of the negatives, some of the concerning trends defensively, things that this Rockets team needs to get ironed out, some possible changes that could really impact and benefit this Houston Rockets team. We're going to break it all down for you coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can help the show out tremendously by commenting anything below. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, the X's and O's man himself, Alykhan Bijani, who you can follow on Twitter at Rockets_insider. And then on the opposite end, I am back home. I am no longer in freezing cold Denver. You don't have Beanie Jackson today. You've got Hoodie Jackson today. I have fresh off my flight. I am home. My left ear still hasn't unpopped yet, but we are sitting down to bring this episode to you guys. Alykhan, let's start with the back-to-back set of games in Denver. We're going to look at some bigger picture stuff here in segments 2 and 3. But he just starts laughing. Look, I don't know why. I guess I'm like a masochist or something, but I did decide, because it was so perplexing, like how bad they looked in game 2 compared to game 1 against the Nuggets. And so I decided to, against my better judgment, download the 2 games and like have them on my laptop so that I could like go back and rewatch some stuff while I was on my 3-hour flight back to Houston. And Alykhan,
great TV right there. That was phenomenal television.
Alykhan, I was so like I don't think I was critical enough like in the initial recap, because upon like secondary watch and kind of looking at some of the plays and just some of the stuff, I feel like the effort was just not there by the Rockets. And this is a team that I feel like this season hasn't lacked for effort. They haven't lacked for desire, trying to win, right? This is only the second like blowout loss of the season. And even, Silas and KPJ talked about it after the game. They said that their readiness wasn't quite there. And I think it's a little frustrating. Like, it's just, like, what happened, man? Like, there was no discipline. They were abandoning like the plays that were being drawn up. Like, the moment they hit like any adversity, Denver would try to blow something up in the half court, and they would just like, oh, well, all right, KPJ ISO, Jalen Green ISO. Like, just it was very frustrating upon rewatch to see happening over the course of that second game, compared to especially how well they played in that first game.
You know me, I like to look at.
He's speechless. He has no words.
I like to look at positives. I like to look at things that build. But we talked about this, Jackson, a few months ago when we did the scheduled release episode. I said, I'm looking at a few games as super important with this young squad, and those are those back-to-back games. I was very disappointed. You had a terrific first half offensively in game 1 against Denver. You were only down like 3 or 4 points at halftime. And you're like, this is something you can build on. You lost the game, but you can build on it, right? You were competing in the game until the end of the third quarter when they won that little 8-0 run, kind of went up high-end double digits and kind of put the game away. Game 2 comes out. Man, I don't understand. You had 2 days to look at the film. You have already gone against it in terms of the actions they run. You know what's coming. They know what's coming for you, yet you essentially poop your pants. It's frankly, there's no X's and O's to this. I'm sorry if you're here for X's and O's talk, but frankly, it's embarrassing. You have 2 fast break points in the first few quarters when you're supposed to be a fast break team. That's inexcusable. You struggle at creating in the half court. So your offense is predicated on scoring quickly in transition, but you're slowly bringing the ball up. I get it. Your defense struggled. You gave up layup after layup, and so you're playing against a set defense. That does not mean you slowly bring the ball up. You still try to push the pace.
There was very little urgency in that game, for
Yeah,
sure.
Frankly, it's disappointing that you have a team that has all these players with all this talent. It's unquestionable they have the talent. But why aren't you playing well? What is the reason? What is the reason you're overhelping? Jackson, you were there at practice. The days in between, right? Tuesday, you were there at practice. Steven Salas said what? We're working on our help. Jalen Green talked to you. We're working on our help because Alperen was oftentimes one-on-one against Nikola Jokic. So you saw, you know what? In that second game against Denver, let's help a little bit. Let's help a little bit. You don't help away from the best shooter on the opposing team.
Yeah, the decision-making process on who to help off of, when to help, like it was the entire, and this is what's so weird is it almost would have been like they probably would have just been better off sticking with the original game plan going in from game one, which was just let Jokic be on an island with Sengun and just, all right, Alp, good luck. Like, good luck handling the two-time MVP.
Instead you make him into a 10-assist first half player.
Yep.
What are you doing?
Yeah. And that's where I'm at a loss, Alykhan, because I don't know if it was necessarily the adjustment and the game plan that was flawed on their decision to try and force the ball out of Jokic's hands more, or to help him, to help with Alp, or if it was the execution of the game plan. I think it's probably a little bit of both, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
It's definitely a little bit of both, and frankly, it's also the execution. I think a friend of the show, Itamar, posted a clip of a guy helping on the nail away from Michael Porter Jr. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're gonna try to go and help on an Ish Smith drive? Ish Smith we're gonna pull up from three on you? What are you doing? It's you have your head coach, then you have your assistant coaches, you have your player development. Your assistant coaches are there pregame, sitting with the players, going through film, helping them understand what their assignments will be. This is a second game. You're playing the same team. Why are you making mistakes you weren't making the first game? That is the question I have. It's a young team. I get it. They're going to make mistakes. I get it. They're going to try to get their own. I get it. But this is not just a one-game problem. I'm talking about problems that have been going on for multiple weeks. You have a guy like Sengun who's so good at passing the basketball, but he feels like he has to get his own. Jabari, there's a reason why Jabari doesn't put the ball down on the floor when he gets the ball. He needs to get his own. We've talked about this. It's frustrating to watch because it's such a talented group. If they learn to play together and to play off each other's strengths, they would be such a better team.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, and this is where some of it comes back to, like, some of the success of this team throughout the season. Are they succeeding just because they're just a talented group? And I say succeeding, right? Succeeding in the terms of, like, they've been competitive by and large through the majority of their 16 losses, except for this one and the one loss earlier this season against the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, I think sometimes it's just the talent will prevail at the end, but as far as just this game especially, right, I think it's maybe even more frustrating because you look at, what happened in game one, you go to game two, and there was just a distinct lack of no discipline with guys on the floor, a distinct lack of maybe like accountability as well, because the game got out of hand so quickly, and then, they kind of played even the rest of the way, but they weren't ever really able to get back into it. They weren't utilizing Alp the same way offensively that they did in the first game, because they were doing a lot of cool stuff with him in the first game that just wasn't there at all in the second game. And some of that is credit to the Denver Nuggets. They made adjustments. They switched things up a little bit. But at the same time, the Rockets just felt like they just came out flat. They came out flat. They didn't have the right energy, and they weren't ready. And ultimately, that falls back on, it's some of it's on the players for sure, but preparing the team, getting the team ready falls back on the coach. That falls back on Silas. And so having sat through it a second time and, like, just watching certain spots of the game and seeing, and again, the players aren't without blame here. I think everybody has a little bit of blame here for how the team looked, but coming up, do want to discuss with you something that has been an ongoing trend, right, with the Rockets, is what's going on with the 5 spot, right? You've got LP, you've got Usman Garuba, you've got Bruno Fernando, who's now returned to the lineup, and I got a chance to kind of ask Steven Silas about what some of his thought processes in the rotations, in the decisions for who plays and when, and how they balance those 5 guys at the 5 spot. We're going to talk about that, but first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis this season. Get the latest odds and trends for every single professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer, even esports. They've got you covered for everything over at BetOnline. Right now, you can take a look at who the odds-on title favorites are this year in the NBA. Boston Celtics leading the pack by a wide margin, plus 375 to win this year's title. Got the Milwaukee Bucks right behind them at plus 600. Golden State Warriors at plus 750. The Phoenix Suns at plus 800, and then a distant 5th is the LA Clippers at plus 1,000. So for all of those odds and more, be sure to visit betonline.net to learn about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Alykhan, one of the things too that stood out in this game is, this was, I believe, Monday's game against Denver was the first game in which Alp and Bruno Fernando, both active and ready to play and available this season. It's only been 4 games, but it's the first game this season where Alp has gotten the start over Bruno Fernando. And I think he did well with his minutes in that first game against Denver. And then second game against Denver rolls around and they struggle, right? And I think Mike Malone did a great job of trying to counter the Rockets rebounding their size with DeAndre Jordan, who was fantastic in both games, really gave the Rockets trouble. They had a lot of size compared to the Rockets, and I think that was one of the issues that the Rockets faced is they don't have a lot of size at that 5 spot, right? Alp's an undersized 5. Garuba is basically a 4 at the NBA level. He's an undersized 5. And Bruno Fernando is the biggest of their 5s, but even he was not having a lot of success in the minutes where he was out there having to check Jokic or dealing with the size of DeAndre Jordan. So, I mean, as far as the coaching chess match goes, having DeAndre Jordan in your back pocket to throw out there in the second unit to, shore up the rebounding department really worked out in the Denver Nuggets' favor. But I did think, after the game Monday, asked Silas, so, what goes into it, right? Why did Sengun start? And why did you go Usman Garuba as the first sub off the bench? Bruno Fernando got those spot minutes to close the second half once Alp was in foul trouble in the first game. And his response was basically more or less along the same lines as what he said before Bruno Fernando returned to the lineup, which basically it's going to be fluid. And he said Alp got the start because Alp's been playing really, really well. And he brought Garuba off the bench first because he felt like they needed a little bit more defensive versatility on the floor. And he mentioned that the times when Bruno Fernando is going to play is probably going to be more so depending on the opposing team's defense and whether or not they feel like they can get going downhill and utilize him as a lob threat, kind of offensively. And so I thought that was kind of at least shine a little bit of a light on when we can maybe expect some of those guys to be subbed in, when they can be subbed out, what the rotation pattern at the 5 spot's going to look like.
No, it tells me a lot about what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to be able to play against the matchups, right? And Bruno Fernando will likely play downhill when you're playing against a team that does play drop coverage, but it may not necessarily help, right, from the weak side corner, similar to what the Rockets do. So we may see that. But, something else that Steven Silas talked about that was really interesting to your question. He said he acknowledges that it'll be difficult to play 3 centers. That's interesting to me. So which of those 3 is not getting playing time? And Jackson, I have a question for you because you were there on the ground. And for our Locked On Rockets listeners, Jackson was the only, I don't want to say only, but he was one of the main people there who traveled to Denver.
I was the only one there.
He was the only one there. Okay. So Jackson honestly had a lot of great opportunity to be on the ground and see everything. So Jackson, let's pick your brain here. When you were there, right? When you were there and you were going through all of this, what stood out to you about how they're operating in practice with their bigs? What stood out to you in terms of on the court, being there in media and seeing how they communicate? Which big out of those 3 do you feel like is a leader on the court? Because I think that's going to be really important to determine. And leader, I use leader in multiple ways, right? But in the crux of an NBA offense and defense, somebody who's vocal and gets the team organized. So if you had to rank these three guys and figure out which one does those things the most, from first to third, who would it be?
It's so tough because I think that when you're looking at the Rockets 5 spot, I put a lot of faith in the organization early in the season when we found out, oh, Bruno Fernando is going to, be, the starting center, and he's going to, he's had such an impact through training camp. I don't see Bruno Fernando doing or bringing to the table the things that Garuba does defensively or that Sengun does offensively. And that's where I think the Rockets kind of have their problems inherently is none of these guys are without their warts. Sengun is a superb offensive player, and his issues defensively are overblown, but at the same time, he does struggle defensively. And in fact, after talking with a couple of the Rockets assistant coaches kind of before these, Nuggets games and kind of getting to pick their brains a little bit, the entire defense is skewed towards helping Alperen Sengun when he's on the floor.
Bingo.
And the fact that they angle the entire defense, which we're going to talk about a little bit, kind of some of the Rockets pick and roll coverages in segment 3, but the fact that they have the entire defense skewed towards helping LP and he still struggles is not a great look. And it also winds up making the guards look kind of bad. It makes the perimeter defense look worse because it looks like they're not doing their jobs when in reality they're struggling because the workload on them is monumental, if you will, because of what they're trying to do to, hide LP, if you will, or cut or make up for his shortcomings. But then you flip it and you go to Usman Garuba, who doesn't bring nearly the offensive punch that Alperen Sengun does, but the Rockets defense it becomes really, really good when Garuba's on the floor. His ability to switch, his ability to navigate pick and roll coverages, his communication is the other part that stands out with Garuba. Garuba is a good communicator on defense, and he calls things out in the pick and roll. That was something that was highlighted to me. So with that, I mean, it's almost impossible to rank them and just say 1, 2, 3, because Garuba and Sengun are basically polar opposites in what they bring to the table. Now, Garuba, if I had to argue the two, I think Garuba's offense is above currently Sengun's level of defense.
Okay. Well,
so
with that in mind, then, right? If you had to give playing time right now, I will tell you, Alperen, you've been talking to assistant coaches. My assumption is, and tell me if I'm wrong, so they want to give LP 30 to 32 minutes a night, and just as the 5. And that means you have around 16 to 18 minutes for your backup center or /4 who can play that role. Is that Garuba or is that Fernando?
I think it's Garuba right now, for sure. And I think that the way we're going to see this thing kind of work itself out is the Bruno Fernando minutes are going to be kind of the spot minutes here and there, where maybe there's a specific matchup that they can take advantage of, or there's a specific defense, a scheme that they're going up against where they can throw Bruno out there and get that downhill lob threat going. But the way that LP has played and the way that guys are learning how to play off of him offensively, I think the coaching staff is starting to be aware of that. And they're also very specifically, again, catering the defense to trying to, help LP on that side of the floor. And a team doesn't do that unless they want him out there, right? They want LP to be out there because they know how potent of a weapon he can be offensively. And there's still times where offensively it feels like he's not being used like he was, in that first half against Denver, the first game. It felt like he was that connective tissue piece offensively. Things were running through him, even though he wasn't just getting post up after post up or elbow touch after elbow touch. He was touching the ball every possession down because the Nuggets were playing drop coverage and he was slipping the drop coverage, which shouldn't be an issue. If you're playing drop coverage, a slip shouldn't hurt you, but it was because Jokic wasn't moving his feet. And so LP was making them pay for that. And the decision-making by LP offensively was great. And that's why the offense looked so good. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I think the hierarchy of center is very clearly Sengun, Garuba, and then Bruno Fernando in that tertiary spot.
I'm eager to see here, Jackson. Our play in the third segment is going to be about drop coverage. And I'm eager to hear from you based off of your comments and based off how the defense played. What needs to happen moving forward to be able to maximize that? Because if Sengun and Garuba are going to play, right? Those are two different types of bigs defense, or those are two different types of schemes that you're going to be employing with those two players. And not just for this season, but for future seasons as well. We're talking big picture now, right? We're going to the X's and O's in terms of not just this season, but moving beyond that as well. Curious to hear from you when you were on the ground, how you think that will work, and we'll get into the play and kind of break down what drop coverage means for the Rockets defense with Sengun coming up next.
And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. So, Alykhan and I have voiced a lot of our frustrations over these first two segments, so let's kind of dive in a little bit here. This is, we do a lot of film breakdown here with Alykhan here at, our unofficial. We stopped calling it Locked On Rockets film room a while ago, but that's always been our unofficial tag for these episodes. So let's try and figure out what in the hell is going on with the Rockets defensive coverages. And we have our visual tool to kind of help out if you're following along on YouTube. You pointed to the wrongs. There you go. Yeah, it's that way. That if you're pointing on YouTube, it's on that side, Alykhan. So let's pull that up. So yeah, just whatever. Just point every direction. Point up, down, left, right, and eventually you'll point at the right spot. So Alykhan, walk us through, because I have an understanding of what the Rockets are trying to do defensively, and I mentioned it earlier. You don't? Okay. There is no understanding for what they're doing defensively. Okay, got it. Look, just go ahead.
So the Rockets, we hear different terms, right? We hear like the drop coverage and things like that. The Rockets run different types of coverage. It's not just wholly just a drop coverage. But before we get into that, let's talk about what drop coverage means, Jackson. Drop essentially means your big is far back from the perimeter. Not far back, not like Brook Lopez or Paul Gasol against James Harden in the 2017 semifinals.
That's what you would call a deep drop.
Yeah, that's a deep drop. But a drop is more so towards that free throw line area, kind of trying to contain the ball handler when they're coming off the screen, right? And your defense, the perimeter defender is kind of going over the top, kind of stay at the hip of the offensive player. Then in being a drop coverage, you can protect both the ball handler and also that screener who's trying to dart north to south towards the rim, right? Now, what the Rockets do, because of Alperen Sengun, is they like to help, okay? And help can come from either two places. It can come from the strong side, which is where the ball is angling towards, so the nearest corner defender or wing defender, or it can come from the opposite side. Most likely is going to come from the opposite side or the side with two or more shooters, okay? And so in the case with the Rockets, what they've been doing is that they bring a guy from the corner to be able to come help. Let's say there's a pick and roll going on the left side, okay? Guy's in the middle of the court, screens on the left side, guy goes left. They're kind of, everything is the action, the ball, everything's happening on the left side. Then there's two shooters on the right. Well, since there's two shooters on the right and two defenders on the right, one of those defenders is going to rotate over. So that big, especially if they struggle kind of containing both the ball handler and the screener, which is something that Alperen Sengun sometimes struggles with, and he's trying to get better at, then you have an extra defender there to take away the lob threat or that pass inside in that 18 to 15 to 12-foot area where they will go up for a layup, slam dunk, whatever, okay? So you have that kind of the guy who cheats over, who helps over from that corner. When that happens, it is the responsibility of that lone defender on the weak side, so that slot defender, to be able to then rotate either towards the corner shooter who gets the ball or then back to where their initial assignment was. And then also you have people who are able to kind of go into rotation from there. So as soon as that help comes, everybody else needs to know and communicate, right? Communicate, hey, I'm helping. I'm coming over weak, or I'm defending. I'm coming over as help. Whatever your code is, right? You're coming over. That's when the rotation sparks. Okay? And so in this case, that's kind of how it plays. You see it on the screen. I kind of vocalize it to you. What is the problem with the Rockets defense, though? Jackson.
They don't ever know where to be. It's the problem. That's what it is. So like in theory it makes sense, right? Like in theory it's like, oh, this is a great way to like help, Alp or any big that is struggling in the pick and roll, right? This would be a great coverage, a great scheme, but you have to have it's two-parter, right? You have to have capable defenders who can actually like make the closeouts, understand the reads, all that, and then it's a communication element just as the team, like which you already highlighted. And so it's like a two-part issue for the Rockets, where I feel like they've got guys who are capable of executing the scheme, but aren't doing it. Like it's just tough the number of times that you see like, okay, pick and roll is happening. Okay, guy helps over from the weak side, and then it's that one defender caught between the two shooters, and he's having to decide, okay, who am I going to the shooter, that's on the wing? Am I still covering the corner? Or you see like a late rotation where that guy is stuck on his man in the corner, and then it's just a wide open shot on the wing because the guy is not in that middle ground, kind of hovering between the two guys, because that's what it is. It's one lone defender stuck checking two shooters on the perimeter, and it's up to that defender to be able to recognize where he needs to be, and then it's also up to the help defender who comes over to help with the pick and roll to be able to recover and get back out to the perimeter quickly if the pass gets back out there. And it's like a 2-part issue. So actually, it's like a 7-part issue, but it's like it's.
So it's very complicated. Defenses are supposed to be complicated, right? There's drop coverage. You can also run drop coverage, but do it in a defensive scheme called weak. What weak means essentially, Jackson, is that you're trying to push the offensive player to go in the direction of their weaker hand. So if I'm a right-handed basketball player, I'm trying to go right? I'm trying to go right. But if I'm a right-handed basketball player as a defense, if I'm saying weak, usually if you see people trying to do weak, they have multiple different signs. One can be kind of putting two hands as a fist, or just different signs depending on what's going on. That can also be a zone, right? But this, whatever the sign is, they'll say weak. You'll hear it on the game if you pay attention closely, and they'll essentially try to force and shade that hand towards the weaker hand and force them that way. In that time as well, you can essentially play a drop coverage technically, but you're kind of focusing on that weaker hand. So that's another example, just to kind of give our audience some understanding. The Rockets do employ weak defensively. You may see that. Just pay attention to the ball handler where they dribble, and you may hear it when, especially in games where you can kind of hear what's on the court. You'll be able to hear the Rockets say weak. But I bring all this up, Jackson, because we've been discussing Alperen Sengun and Garuba. I think the Rockets are playing the wrong defense with Alperen Sengun.
That was actually gonna be where I'm glad you brought it up, because that's what I wanted to pitch it back to you and just say, well, like if you had the opportunity to employ a defense for this Houston Rockets team, what would you run? What would you elect to use to, I can't say take advantage of Alperen Sengun defensively. What would you employ to have him not get taken advantage of defensively? How's that?
It's tough, and I'm a boomer bust gamble kind of guy. I want to generate turnovers. All right. That's how I feel like, especially with a team that struggles in the half court, I want to generate turnovers. Now, if I give up points, I give up points, but I want to give up points with high energy and effort. This Rockets
spoiler alert, you're already giving up points with this defensive scheme, so it can't get much worse.
Let me say something about this Rockets team. They like to cheat, they like to gamble, they like to overhope. That's their MO. It's something they need to learn. They need to figure out not to overhope, but they like to. So if you're playing with a team that likes to cheat, overhope on drives, do all those things, play a perimeter-oriented defense. Hedge, trap, put two on the ball, force them to rotate, get in the passing lanes, right? We've talked about this. The way defenses are predicated on getting turnovers now is a hybrid of zone and man. The Rockets cannot do that. They are not equipped with the experience yet to be able to run a hybrid zone man defense like the Celtics do, or like other teams do.
But they do have young, energetic athletes who are lightning quick. And if you just started blitzing left and right, then you might actually be able to get something done.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you run this all the time. Nobody's telling you to run this every single possession. But simply hedging with Alperen Sengun, letting him show a little bit so he's at the perimeter, so he doesn't have to dart back and kind of play with his hands high and having to decide, am I picking up the 5 or am I picking up the 1? Who am I picking up here? Having him at the perimeter and having your help defense, which always likes to come over at the rim like a KJ Martin, which is me advocating to start KJ Martin in this case. But having or Jabari Smith, who's been an excellent job, honestly, as a weak side rim protector, I have to say. Let them take advantage of their strength, which is coming over and protect the rim on rotations. Alp can stay towards and kind of just stay focused on one ball handler, right? And allow him to slowly get back into the play and set back up in the paint. You have a team like Jalen Green, who was slender, KPJ, who was slender, can go around screens and kind of help hedge and kind of trap and ice them, kind of ice the ball handler towards the sideline. You can do all those things. And to me personally, that is how I would do it. Now, I get why the Rockets are doing it this way. They have a young team. They need to learn the defensive principles first. They're still learning how to close out. I will have to say they're a much better closeout team than last year. I have to give the coaching staff credit for working very diligently with the Rockets players on closing out. But even then, I think ultimately you have to start putting in some more perimeter-oriented stuff and go from there. Switching works when you can kind of play in a shell defense. And the term, if you're listening to us, what a shell defense essentially is if you're containing your defense. It's a shell around the paint, a shell around the perimeter, a shell around the rim. You are not allowing anybody to get past you. Okay, that's a shell. The Rockets have a cracked shell. One guy comes open and water comes right in, right? The ball handler can go straight in. So if that's the case and this team is rotating, it likes to rotate, likes to cheat, put them into rotations. Have your defense, have your players play to their strengths. I think hedging is a good potential, like couple possession here and there a game solution to help you with Alperen Sengun, particularly when he's not playing with another 4 or 3 who can help protect the rim for him, right? If you're playing with a 3-guard lineup and you don't have rim protection, right? Maybe sometimes throwing this out there can help you. And so I just think, besides switching, besides just drop, besides just weak, adding some hedging, adding some trapping, adding some showing, just doing things that kind of help you as a defense utilize Sengun more to keep him on the floor is a good thing. Also, number one from all of this, the pro. You're trying to not allow Alp to get into foul trouble. If I were to go and look at the stats, I don't have them in front of me, so I'm sorry, listeners. But if I were to go to look at the stats, I look at Alp's defensive rating when he has, like, let's say it's the first quarter and he only has 2 fouls. It significantly probably declines. We can see with the eye test because he just plays more passive. But whenever he's not in foul trouble, he plays more aggressive, especially offensively, which allows him to make those risks, make those passes, do those things. Keeping him in a situation where he's hedging, right, where he's on the perimeter and keeping his hands away, which he can do, will allow him to stay away from foul trouble and allow your KJ Martins and Jabari Smith of the role to rotate over, allow your KPJs and Jalen to stay in front and kind of help and get into the passing lanes and get out in transition so you get easy points. So for me, that makes a lot of sense to employ moving forward.
I like it. I'm sold on the idea of them hedging, of them showing a little bit more. Throughout this entire season, I think one of the downsides has just been like you'll on any given game, you'll see the Rockets go up against another team and they employ a diverse array of like defensive things, especially like the Clippers would do a bunch of stuff defensively. The Raptors did a bunch of stuff defensively. Like there's other teams that get really creative with how they defend. Even Nick Nurse, his like calling guards, like he'll throw out a random like full court press in like the first quarter just to like take you out of your rhythm.
Get you out of rhythm. That's all it is. Teams are going to score. You have to get a team out of rhythm. And for this Rockets team, if you can get another opposing team out of rhythm, it gets them going offensively. And we've talked about this. The Rockets defense is predicated on their offense. Once they get going offensively, their defense is much better.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because normally you'd like it to be the other way around, right? You'd like your defense to get your offense going, but it's also something that kind of feeds into itself because this is a Rockets team that is not running, right? They talked a whole training camp all through media day about wanting to run, wanting to get in transition, and they don't.
They walk up the court even in transition. Yeah.
And by forcing some turnovers, by igniting some fast breaks, by playing the goon squad significantly more, because that goon squad lineup does actually do some of these things, right? They cause havoc defensively. They get out in transition, all of those things. I don't know. I feel like this Rockets team desperately needs a fresh coat of paint. They need to try some new things, change some things up, maybe a change to the starting lineup, which is one of the worst, if not the worst starting lineup in the entire NBA as far as net rating is concerned. KJ over Eric Gordon would be a breath of fresh air in that starting lineup to allow them to continue to do some better things or unlock some things differently that they could do defensively rather than having the 3 guards out there. But we have gone at length, Alykhan. This has been this has been a cathartic episode for me, I think. How do you feel? Do you feel a little bit better after this?
I feel good. And I want to say something because I'm usually not very negative. I like to provide a optimistic look on the team and try to provide some more insight. And last time I did a show where I was negative, people commented and said, why are you bringing on a guy who was negative? Jackson, am I a negative person? I'm probably one of the most
Absolutely
optimistic
not.
people you ever meet.
Absolutely not.
So when I'm saying things, it's not because I'm negative, I'm a Debbie Downer. It's because I see there are issues and I'm trying to put forward solutions which I think can work. Which Jackson and I talked to players, we talked to coaches, we talked to all these guys. Jackson was there in Denver. He gave us great insight. This is just an honest perspective. And in my opinion, the best perspective you're going to find on the Rockets so far this season is listening to Jackson every single day.
Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. Also, we're not going to call you Debbie Downer. We got to call you Boohoo Bijani. But anyways, with that, we got to wrap this show up. Alykhan, let everyone know where to track you down at.
Follow me on Twitter at Rockets_insider. Make sure you're following us at Locked On Rockets, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Stitch. I don't care. Wherever you get your podcast, Twitter, make sure you're following us. And we'll see you next week.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, appreciate you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We are also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.